I have 14 subjects to speak on, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. So don't listen to him. The material that we were referred to for the symposium, when it comes to the intellectual faculties, does list 14 items. And you've heard these words, Brother Johnson words, I call them concentrativeness. I think that's a word. But the heading is composed of these 4 words: perceiving, reasoning, remembering, and imagining. And I'm going to pick one of those to talk about, and that is remembering. Okay. So I would ask this question of the brethren, which is, where is your memory? Where is your memory? It's a thing, right? Like you have, if I said, where is your phone? You would say, sorry, I have it right here. If I said, where is your bank? Where's your money? You would say, it's in such and such a bank. But when I say, where is your memory? I know what you're thinking, but we're going to talk about that. And I think you're going to be surprised. And I was already studying this, which is why I decided to talk about it, because it was available already to me. When I was a young guy, I found a book for sale, some classified advertising, and the book was Instant Memory. And it was published by some people who call themselves the Institute for Advanced Thinking, which is directly west of here, about 50 miles in Pacific Palisades, California. Of course, they can't be there anymore because this is when I was a young guy. And I was pretty interested in this book, which was a booklet actually. And it gave you all these tricks about helping to remember the last 12 license plates that you saw and all this kind of stuff. And so I lost interest after a while, but I was promoting that too much to my friends because we went to visit somebody at his house one time. And when we were leaving, I had to say, wait, stop time. I got to go get my stuff. And I had forgotten my memory book. And, young guys can needle each other for months and months over something like that. Oh, Kel forgot his memory book. So anyway, here's the question. You take memory for granted. It's like the air you breathe, and everything that we see and think and do in our lives is controlled in some measure by memories and habits. And when I ask, where's your memory? We would ask, how does memory work? And most people take it for granted that our memories are stored in our brains. Everybody used to think that, and they still do. The Greeks used to think of it as impressions made in wax. And then toward the end of the 20th century, you started thinking of it like the wires in a telephone exchange. Remember the operator used to say, "The number, please," and she would plug the thing in. So now today, we tend to think of memory as analogous to computer memory systems, flash drives and digital data saved on a device somewhere. And so the metaphors have changed, but this idea that trace memory, it's called trace memory in the industry where they look for memory, it's taken for granted that by most scientists and almost everyone else that our memories are stored in our brains. And from the materialist point of view, they must be stored as some kind of a traceable thing in your brain. Where else would they be? Seems like a stupid question to even ask it. One of the people that writes on this, neuroscientist by the name of Stephen Rose, and I'm quoting him here, he says that the standard assumption is that memories are some way in the mind, and therefore, to a biologist, they're in the brain. But how does that work? There's memory involves two things. First of all, you learn something. And second of all, you can recall it later on. And we infer that the thing that lies between the learning, of course, it's past now, it happened, it's irretrievable. We infer that there's something between those two events. You learn something and you're going to be able to recall it. And those people in the industry where they research this, they refer to that as trace memory. Now, there's been over a century, billions of dollars and huge amounts of effort expended in trying to find a trace of memory in brains from flatworms to humans. Never have anybody succeeded in finding anything at all, especially in these last decades with the development of sophisticated research technology in medicine, magnetic resonance imaging, and so forth. And the motivation to figure out what memory is was coming largely from the medical institutions, the medical university research institutions, but in the later years from like venture capital firms, because what if you could make a pill you could sell to help somebody think more quickly or help them remember better or increase their stamina? I'm not sure how many people will remember this phrase, the Human Genome Project. Remember that? You don't hear anything about it anymore. It took 10 years and it cost billions, and it involved everybody who was anybody in medical research. And the thing flamed out because they wanted to, the human genome, brother Adam just mentioned it, is the DNA molecule. And as he also mentioned, similar molecule to every living thing, you know, the double helix. And the Human Genome Project was, let's map out the human DNA molecule, because when we do, we're going to learn how we can make this stuff and sell it, and we're going to be fabulously wealthy, because we're going to figure out everything about the human body's operation or every organic being. And that whole process, some big venture capital people went bust on that, because they all assumed that the DNA molecule is like the operating system of a computer. It runs everything. But that was not true, because what they learned was, they did learn some very useful things, especially things that enabled doctors to practice gene therapy, because they knew already that some diseases were due to genetic defects. But as far as the DNA molecule being the operating system of the being, that thing was never true. Today, people, that's why you don't hear anything about medications that can help you remember, unless anybody who has not heard a Prevagen commercial, okay? And you notice how mild their claims are, because you know you have to infer or imply that it'll help you think. Prevagen for your brain, that's the tagline. So DNA molecule that was discovered does one thing, and anybody in any biomedical people or biological evolutionary biologists, anybody in that trade will know this. It codes for the sequence of amino acids that are necessary to build the different proteins in the different cells, because you have the same DNA molecule in every type of cell, you know, whether it's heart muscle or skin or whatever. And the parts that need to make proteins in that type of cell are turned on, the rest of it's turned off. So that thing flamed out. And there's no memory to be found, the DNA molecule, there's no memory to be found in any of the dissections of the probably hundreds of thousands of attempts at research. So where is it? Well, you know, I just wanted to also mention that if we think of ourselves as having, I want to be brief, as we think of ourselves as having memories that are accumulating in our brain, there are a couple of really appalling logistical and philosophical problems that have to be resolved somehow. One of them is that in order for a trace of some kind to be activated, you have to have your pages in order. That was an unintended free joke. I can follow Brother Walter without making one joke at least. Anyway, so there, if you have a memory that's stored in your brain, you have files in your brain, okay? So if you want to recall one of those files, you have to have a system that has files of its own to find the thing you're looking for. And it doesn't take long before you get into this vicious regress where every system has to have a system waiting for it, and you can't go far with that reasoning. And the other problem is this. We don't think of ourselves this way, but every molecule in your body changes. It's a continuous process. Speaking of the DNA molecule, Francis Crick, Watson and Crick, who discovered the configuration of the double helix, which they didn't even solve. They were first on the scene with the answer to that problem, which was a years-long issue, by studying what other people were saying and making an amalgam of it and presenting that, and they were right. They didn't do the work, but they had the answer. But Francis Crick says, so he's a famous biologist that everybody recognizes. He says that almost all the molecules in our bodies, with the exception of DNA, the genetic material, turn over in a matter of days or weeks, or at the most a few months. So you have a problem, technical problem of if you are remembering stuff in a brain, and where all the molecules are being replaced every few weeks, and they are. All right, we don't have to control that. It's the way that we're made, fearfully and wonderfully. So you have the problem of the vicious regress, which I just mentioned, which makes it seem just impossible to imagine how you could retrieve memories from your brain, and the fact that your brain is changing, swapping out molecules every 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So everybody's still looking, the people that are determined to find a way to sell memory are not going to give up. They're going to just keep pushing ahead, spend money, get new research facilities underway, and in the hopes that they're going to find the answer. But maybe the answer is that's not where our memories are. That could be the answer. Okay. So we'll go to the scriptures and just make a few simple points, because we know what happens to us when we die. Ecclesiastes 12:7, then shall the dust return unto the earth, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. So if you think of all the billions of people who have died and decayed over these thousands of years, their brains are decayed. Then I want us to think about Job, the 14th chapter, the 13th verse. And this is what it says. It says, oh, that thou wouldst hide me in the grave, that thou wouldst keep me secret until thy wrath be past, that thou wouldst appoint me a set time and remember me. So if you go to our research materials, on e-volume, page 360, on reprint 2600, the first paragraph, reprint 5109, the fourth paragraph, reprint 5402, the fourth paragraph, it addresses the idea of Job saying, remember me. And these are the comments that you find in those references. Remember me means by calling me from oblivion into being again. Remembering that everything that we are is due to everything that we have learned. The character that you develop, the person who you are, is all a result of the experience that you've had in life. So if we think of Luke 12:23-46, When Jesus is on the cross, he cries out with a loud voice. He says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having thus said, he gave up the ghost. Incidentally, the Diaglott says he expired. Giving up the ghost is kind of 17th century English idea. But Jesus was raised a spirit. He didn't have a human brain. He was everything that he was before and then some. And so the point that we're making is that maybe it helps us to think of ourselves as being on record with the Lord. And when he brings us back, like we see here, it's because he remembers us. Job says, remember me. And we say, that means bring me back to life. And the reconstruction of the human brain, which I think would be one of the things that would happen with us, doesn't seem to be a critical thing to bring us back as we were to start with. It depends on the fact that we are logged into the creator's memory, so to speak, using computer language now.